verify the top one, which should be the streaming URL. You have rtmp://.
Oh, it looks like it's going further this time. Done. All right, I am now online.
I'm going to verify really quick. All right, it shows that you are live.
Great. All right, thank you. Bye.
All right, have a great Science Sunday.
All right.
Bye.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm actually in beautiful, sunny Southern California visiting some friends, and I'll be doing the broadcast from here today. Very quickly, if you'll just give me a minute, I'm going to forward the Zoom meeting link to Mike Winters so that he can join. And let's see, copy invite link. And I'm going to send that off to Mike, and then we'll get started. Apologies for being a couple of minutes late here, working through some technical difficulties. This was the first time that I think we've done this remote kind of project and streaming for Science Sunday. So again, apologies for the delay in getting started by a few minutes here. All right. And then hopefully Mike will be joining us in a few minutes. But again, I want to welcome everybody. Today's topic is about the wonders of the 21st century. So, you know, we hear a lot about the miracles of the 20th century and things including refrigeration and airplane flight and Einstein's theory of relativity, the automobile, mass production, just a huge number of things, the flight to the moon. Huge number of things were new in the 20th century. And here we are in the 21st century. We're just sort of getting started with the 21st century. And the question is that continuing? Are there any amazing things that have happened in the 21st century to indicate that we can continue the trajectory of progress? I think that the answer to that hopefully will be clear after today's presentation. So I have selected things that come to my mind for the wonders so far in the 21st century. You know, you may have ideas that you disagree with some of the ones I've listed, or you would like to add to what I've listed. I've tried to list enough such that it's a topic I can cover in about an hour. So again, use the chat feature in YouTube to tell me what you think about the wonders I've selected and ones that that you think would be interesting. I see that there's a couple people online in the YouTube chat saying hi already. I appreciate that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and I'm going to share my screen here, figure out how to do that. And let's see, apps. My apps, hang on. Again, apologies, just trying to make sure I know how to do this correctly. All right, so I'm going to just go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to share this PowerPoint presentation. Okay, and optimize for video and share sound. So here we go. And I'm going to go back here to the beginning and put this into presentation mode. So while I'm talking here in presentation mode, I may not be able to also see what you're going to be typing in, but I will occasionally look at that. So here we go. Wonders of the 21st century, according to me. The first part is science wonders. So I kind of had to pick and choose on these again, these are ones that came to my mind immediately. The first one is the discovery of the Higgs boson. This is something that had been speculated about ever since the mid 1960s. And it was a key missing part of what's called the standard model of elementary particle physics. In brief, the Higgs boson represents a particle associated with a field. So in quantum mechanics, every particle in nature has an associated field, and conversely, every field in nature has an associated particle. So the Higgs particle is associated with the Higgs field. Now, unlike many other particles that can convey forces in between other particles, like the electromagnetic force and the strong nuclear force, the Higgs field doesn't have a direction. It's just the same everywhere. So it behaves much differently than some of the other force fields that we know about. And the Higgs particle is implicated in providing the mechanism that gives mass to other particles that we see, like the electron and the particles that make up the proton and neutron, etc. So that was a big missing piece until it was discovered in the past, within the past 20 years. So actually, I think about 12 years ago or so. So a big discovery in basic science. The next one is gravity waves. So you all probably recall the big announcement about the discovery of gravity waves. People have been looking for gravity waves, I think, since the 1950s. They built some experiments, and all of those experiments turned up no evidence of gravity waves until this century, when they were finally discovered by LIGO and some other similar gravity wave detectors that use very long, like kilometer long or greater laser beams that meet and then interfere with one another to detect small ripples in space-time. So the gravity wave discovery is another great scientific advancement for this century. Back to particle physics again, there's the discovery of the properties of neutrinos. And one of the most intriguing properties of neutrinos is the fact that neutrinos can oscillate what's called their flavor. So according to the standard model of particle physics, these things that I've highlighted here with a box, these are the neutrinos, and they're associated with the electron and other particles that are very much like the electron. But unlike any other particle, the neutrino that is implicated in nuclear reactions that either absorb or emit a neutrino, the neutrino, as they travel through space, seems to oscillate or change its identity from one sort of neutrino to another. And the exact mechanism for why this happens is still a bit of a mystery. Scientists are trying to crack this puzzle even today. There are all kinds of neutrino experiments that are being conducted, and neutrinos are very, very enigmatic particles. A single neutrino can go through a light year's worth of lead, solid lead, before it has about a 50% chance of having interacted and causing enough of a reaction to emit another particle that allows us to detect the neutrino, the original neutrino. So neutrinos are very elusive and have very interesting physics. And so neutrino science is one of the big fields of study for this 21st century so far. Another basic science discovery of this past century has been related to something previously called junk DNA. So DNA, especially the DNA in more complicated cells, like the cells in our body, cells that have a nucleus, these are called eukaryotic cells, cells with a nucleus. That's kind of what eukaryote means. These eukaryotic cells typically have a lot of what has been deemed junk, just extra DNA base pairs that don't encode for genes. And the original dogma from genetics was that one gene equals one protein, and that's how everything works. Everything is the expression of a protein, either a structural protein or an enzyme protein, etc., that allows for biochemistry to happen. Well, over the past 20, 25 years, maybe going a little bit into the tail end of the 20th century, scientists have discovered that a significant portion of what was previously thought to be junk DNA is not. So about 2% of our DNA in a human being codes for genes. That means about 98% of the DNA in our genetic code is not coding for proteins. Well, about 10 or 20% of that leftover junk is actually not junk. It provides structural information about the way that DNA folds and expresses different genes, literally making them available, making genes available for messenger RNA and other molecules to bind to particular spots on the genetic code within different cells. And there's other previously junk DNA that controls the amount of expression of particular genes. And then there's junk DNA that directly goes into forming RNA parts of the human cell. So it doesn't go through the typical process of transferring a gene out of the nucleus to a ribosome, and then the ribosome creates a protein. Sometimes little bits of RNA are really important in a cell as well. And those instructions for those bits of RNA are encoded in the DNA bundle within your cells. I'm just going to go really quick here and see if I can see if there's been any chats on the YouTube channel while I've been talking. Couple people say, yeah, Michael says CRISPR, nuclear power, genetic testing. So we'll see, Michael, if any of your top ideas shows up in mine as well. All right, let's go back to the presentation. All right, I'm sitting here with a cat that belongs to the people I'm visiting. If you hear a meow, that's not from me. That will be from this lovely and very friendly cat. All right, next, climate change. So scientists have been talking about climate change for a few decades, but we really, the planet Earth and governments have really gotten serious about it in the past 20 years. So I believe that it will continue to be one of the most important scientific areas of exploration and technological innovation. And I hope innovation that helps us combat the deleterious effects of climate change over this 21st century. So in my view, climate change science is a science, a foundational, critical science of the 21st century. And I suspect that none of you would disagree with that. And then another just general science wonder for this century is the discovery of water on the moon and on Mars. You know, we've got several rovers active on planet Mars. We've got satellites orbiting Mars and the moon, actually. And they're returning all kinds of data from modern high-tech instruments about the geology, the chemistry, the climate, and other features of these celestial bodies. And it very well may be that during this 21st century, humanity will build a permanent or semi-permanent outpost on either the moon and or Mars. And insofar as that happens, one of the most critical chemicals that we will need to support life is water. And so not having to transport water in the spaceships that we use to get to these bodies will be important. So the discovery of water on the moon and on Mars has been really, really critical. One of the other things you can do with water is you can split it apart, break the hydrogen off of the oxygen, and then store them separately, and then combine them later catastrophically to release a huge amount of energy. And that is a great rocket fuel, quite literally. So water can be both used for sustenance and for to help build things with concrete aggregates, as well as ultimately turned into rocket fuel. In 2008, water on the moon was discovered, and in 10 years later, 2018, water on Mars was discovered. All right, part 2 of 4, by the way, part 2, biological and medical science wonders of the 21st century so far. And as you have indicated in chat, I think, Michael, CRISPR-Cas9, so the combined molecular tools, the scissors, and then the template copying bit that allows for expedited genetic engineering. Fantastic discovery in the 21st century, allowing us to modify the genetics of organisms, potentially with just incredible benefits to the sustainability of agriculture, as well as to the health of plants, animals, and humans on our planet. I believe Mike, I don't think Mike has joined yet, but I think Mike Winter has given some previous Science Sunday discussions about the mechanism of how CRISPR-Cas9 works. So if you're curious about it, you can find all kinds of scientific discussion about it, including one of our previous Science Sundays. All right, the next one is the Human Genome Project and the associated technology of DNA testing. Things like 23andMe, the ability to genetically test your dog or your cat, the ability to sample mud from a lake bottom and identify the bacteria that have made that mud their home by sequencing the genome of microscopic organisms. Discovery of technologies that allow us to quickly sequence genomes and to compare genomes have allowed us to do all kinds of innovative discoveries with regards to the evolutionary family tree. So we don't just use fossils for understanding the tangled tree or bush of life as species radiate and diverge through time and space. We can also use differences in genomes to either validate or discover brand new relationships between species. So the human genome, and then generically the ability to do testing of DNA, has been really, really innovative this century. Another one, I believe, is AIDS treatment. You know, for 20 years or so, maybe a little longer than 20 years leading up to the 21st century, AIDS was a scourge in many countries and among many populations. It was ravaging Africa. I believe it still continues to be a big problem there. But science has made really good progress to discover treatments and prophylactic medications to combat AIDS. It's becoming a disease that can be lived with instead of died from. And that's those of you who remember the 1980s and 90s, especially in this country, know that that scourge was really horrible and terrifying. And the fact that we've made progress treating it, although we don't yet have a good cure or vaccine, stands as a great innovation this century. So as I said, there's prevention, there's treatment that are both available. The next biological or medical breakthrough that I selected is the sequencing of Neanderthal DNA. The discovery that Homo sapiens and Neanderthals interbred, and that nearly every living human being, especially from the Europe, has some Neanderthal DNA. I believe similarly, the Denisovans from Asia interbred with early Homo sapiens, and there's Denisovan DNA in a lot of the human populations in Asia. So the sequencing of Neanderthal, Denisovan, and other humans, I believe there's also the Homo florensis that were also alive and thriving at the same time as Neanderthals and Denisovans. This was all very interesting stuff, and genetic sampling has helped us understand the relationships between the human branches of the human family tree. All right, again, I'm just going to check real quickly here the chat and see if I'm missing anything before I move on. Somebody's saying, let's see, part of your display is being covered up by a gray bar. I don't know where the gray bar is. I apologize for that. I'm just displaying my screen in full screen, and I see my my portrait there. I apologize, but hopefully you can get the gist of what I'm saying with my words, and the pictures just add to that. All right, back to the presentation. Back to full screen. All right, we talked about Neanderthal DNA. Next is the food pyramid. In the past decade, the National Institutes of Health and the FDA, U.S. Agricultural Association, have decided that the old food pyramid was just completely wrong. And now they've come out with better recommendations for sustaining human health and vitality based upon much better science. Back when the original food pyramid was constructed, it just turns out that it was essentially upside down. Whether that's because various industries lobbied to have their products overrepresented, there were some political issues involved, maybe a lack of scientific rigor, but now we're pretty confident that the recommendations about nutrition made by American physicians and the government are a lot healthier. They talk about limiting foods with a lot of nitrates, a lot of cured foods like sausages and bacon and cured ham, minimizing fast food that have a high density of fat calories, and concentrating more on grains, vegetables, and fruits. And many of you have heard over the past couple of decades the idea of having several servings of fruits and vegetables throughout the day. And a lot of this science has been incorporated into official government recommendations about nutrition. So I think that's pretty good. It's great for school kids, for example, that have lunches provided to them. Hopefully their school districts can afford to follow these guidelines and provide more nutritious sustenance for our children. And then the other biological innovation is mRNA technology. You're likely familiar with that. Again, Mike Winter spoke to us previously about the mRNA vaccines for SARS-CoV-19, the COVID pandemic that we're currently wrestling with. And the mRNA technologies behind that are going to be much more useful than just for this particular pandemic. They can help deliver cancer therapies and targeted therapies to individual people based upon their particular genome. These are really going to be a game changer. Just a week or so ago, I saw a news story that talked about having a kind of genetic targeted missile, if you will, with a trigger and a payload. And according to this story, the trigger is such that part of this targeted molecule looks for mRNA that is naturally expressed by some subpopulation of cells. It could be liver cells or brain cells or heart cells. Every cell in your body, even though it has an identical genetic code, expresses that code differently, and that expression, one path of that expression entails the generation of, or the transfer of mitochondrial RNA. I'm sorry, messenger RNA. That's what the M stands for, is messenger. So the messenger RNA floating around in a cell is dependent upon the function of that cell within your body, within a set of tissues. So they can form this this delivery missile, as it were, to sort of sample the mRNA environment of a given cell. And then if it discovers mRNA of a certain type, then it can essentially release its payload to start generating additional proteins for that cell. Very targeted, amazing stuff. And one of the things that we can do with this, or that scientists have done with this in the lab so far, is that they've detected the particular mRNA signature of cancer cells. And then once that mRNA signature triggers this molecular machine, the payload part of that expresses a gene that says, okay, cell, your time is up. It's your time to die, essentially. Apoptosis. So it triggers cell death called apoptosis. And doing this for a cancer cell can essentially discover the cancer cell and then kill the cancer cell using these tiny genetic machines that are all enabled because of advances with mRNA technology. Incredible stuff. I think in the 21st century, this is literally going to change the way we discover, treat, and cure diseases. All right, part 3, technological wonders, part 3 of 4. So these are just some of the technological wonders that I think are relevant in this century. And I'm sure that many of you can think of other additional ones. First is handheld computers. Okay, that's this thing, right? We've got these smart devices that have incredible computing power, thousands of times more powerful than computers that were available in the 70s and 80s, perhaps millions of times more powerful. And we may call them mobile phones, but they're handheld computers with incredible capabilities that have liberated and informed millions or billions of people around the world. These devices, think about what these devices can do. I try to list some of the things here, flashlight, chess game, a road atlas, a photo album, a cookbook, a library. You can access the encyclopedia of the internet, right? Oh, and by the way, it's a telephone. It's also a teletype. You can text people back and forth. So just an incredible capability in a device that can be affordable to most people. There are certainly some expensive mobile handheld computers, mobile phones, but there are some relatively inexpensive ones that make nearly, if not all, of these features that I've listed available to billions of people around the world. It has been a liberating and an empowering technology over the past 20 years. And the first smartphone, I believe, was the Apple iPhone, and I think that came out in 2007. So just a relatively new technology that has changed the world, changed the way education and communication and information discovery and dissemination has happened. The next one is flat screens, right? If you had to carry around a handheld computer with a big CRT monitor, it would never work. So flat screen technology, full color flat screen technology that allows for motion video and full color video. It allows you to save space in your house by having a much smaller wall mount TV, but it's also enabled all these portable devices like handheld computers and laptop computers, etc. So another great technological innovation that has come into fruition in the 21st century. The internet and social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Dropbox, on and on, Vimeo, the Google services, all of these things are new as of the 21st century, or at the very tail end of the 20th century in terms of something like the Google search. But Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, these all were first devised in the 21st century. And think about the ways that these things have changed the world, both for good and ill, in terms of allowing people to find others that agree with them and to form spontaneous globe or nation spanning communities of interest, whether those interests are based on science and reality, or sometimes, unfortunately, in myth or deception. All right, digital photography and music, also something that has come into being in the 21st century. I bought my first digital camera in, I think, 2002. There were kind of plaything digital cameras before that, but real professional grade digital cameras have only been possible in the 21st century. One of my hobbies is astrophotography, as some of you know, and digital cameras are used extensively and exclusively. I don't know of anybody other than people who are trying to capture some memory, or for the sake of old time's sake, using film in astrophotography. It's all digital now, including the Hubble Space Telescope. And then digital music production, where nearly anybody can make a super high quality recording using electronic instruments in their bedroom or in their garage. You don't have to go to a studio anymore. I'm going to pause again and look for questions and comments on the YouTube feed. Mike Farmer says, John Farmer says, the creation of applications that allows anyone to create a service or function and make it available to the world. Absolutely, right? That's one of the things that happened with smartphones, is not only that you can consume the content made available to smartphones, but you can also more easily create your own programs and distribute that to people around the globe. Mike Pollock says, even though it's a 20th century technology, Bluetooth technology has improved connectivity. Absolutely. I think I'm using a Bluetooth headset right now, and there are many different ways that Bluetooth allows you to connect devices, audio-visual devices, as well as peripherals like mice and digital keyboards and regular sort of typewriter type of keyboards to smart devices. All right, let's see. What else did I list here for technological wonders? Green energy. So in many circumstances, solar power is the cheapest form of electricity available to humanity. I don't know of anybody who saw that coming 20 years ago. Solar cells are relatively expensive, and now solar cell photovoltaics are in many cases cheaper than coal and oil burning electric generation plants. And there continue to be really amazing innovations with regards to solar voltaics. Perovskite, I think I'm saying that correctly. I may not be. Perovskite, a new kind of technology that doesn't use silicon as a substrate for converting light into electricity, are very inexpensive to manufacture, um, likely to change the world. They lack something in terms of durability right now. Scientists are working to crack that problem. I'm here in Southern California visiting some friends, as I mentioned earlier, and there are windmills, electric generating windmills all over. But one of the interesting things is that in some of the regions here in California where windmills are being used extensively, as the windmills age and mechanically fail, the bearings fail or some other mechanical failure, those windmills are being replaced with photovoltaics, because the photovoltaics actually are less expensive to put in terms of infrastructure and give yield a great amount of electricity in return. So photovoltaics, I think, and to a lesser extent, wind power, and the whole concept of green energy with storing energy using, you can store electricity in chemical form, or through gravitational potential energy, or let's see, we've got chemical, gravitational, there's another one I'm forgetting, but essentially batteries or mass. So you can lift water up and then run it down during peak hours and have that water turn turbines that generate electricity. You can hoist a mass into the air, just a giant boulder or a bunch of lead plates or rocks, whatever you want, into the air. And then like a grandfather clock, they'll fall slowly in a controlled way and turn a turbine to generate electricity. So storing the energy and leveling off the demand curve for some of these green technologies is important. And we had somebody speak to our humanist group just last month about technologies used for storing some of these green energy producers' electricity or energy. The price of solar modules has declined by a tremendous amount since 1976. Something that cost $100 or more in 1976 to deploy as a solar panel, that same energy can be obtained by deploying hardware that costs 50 cents or less. So incredible, precipitous drop in the infrastructure cost associated with generating solar energy. All right, and finally, wrapping up part 3, electric cars. So continuing with the energy theme, hybrid vehicles, purely electric vehicles. I have a friend, the friend I'm visiting here in California has a hybrid vehicle. You power it with gasoline. That's the only thing you put into it to make it go, but it gets 45 miles per gallon, similar to a Prius. I think Prius automobiles, Mike Winter has a Prius, and the Prius gets 50 or 55 miles per gallon. Absolutely unthinkable 20, 30, 40 years ago that you could get this kind of mileage out of gasoline just by recovering some of the energy through, when you brake going down a hill or coming to a stop sign and you brake, that dissipates the energy of motion as heat motion. Well, just recover some of that energy using generators and your car becomes much more efficient. And then we've got Teslas and Chevy Volts and other cars that are purely electric, plug-in only. And as our electric grid becomes powered by green technologies, our vehicles will be able to benefit from that as well. All right, part 4, social and societal wonders. Again, I'm just going to pause for a minute, see if there's any other comments on the YouTube channel. Autonomous vehicles. John, that's a great point as well. Vehicles that drive themselves or drive you to wherever you want to go. That's also an incredible technology. The car that my husband and I drive a Lincoln MKZ hybrid can park itself in terms of parallel parking. Something that a lot of people find challenging. Some people pass up an opportunity to park because it's a parallel parking lot, and a lot of people aren't comfortable with that. Well, this car parallel parks itself, and in the 21st century, as it continues to progress, I suspect that self-driving cars and self-driving delivery vehicles, etc., will become more prevalent. Let's see. Looks like Mike Winter may be joining. Mike, are you there? I might have missed. Let me just see here on the Zoom. Again, apologies for some of the technical issues. This is the first time we've done this sort of remote sharing. Mike, are you there? I don't hear him. Well, Mike, I hope you're at least watching, and feel free to type into the YouTube if you haven't been able to join the Zoom meeting. And I'm going to, in this, with respect to time, I'm going to keep going here. So part 4, social and societal wonders. And Mike, if you join us, feel free just to speak up and interrupt. All right, one of the great stories of humanity that has happened in the 21st century is the modernization of China, and not just China, but also what are called the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And their modernization of infrastructure, the modernization of their education systems has lifted the standard of living for literally billions of people around the world, to the point where poverty is greatly ameliorated. Global famines no longer happen except because of political causes, with challenges with infrastructure and transportation. But the world is making enough food and providing enough energy to allow billions of people to have a higher standard of living and participate in modern life in terms of access to information, education, and self-fulfillment, as well as work, labor markets. So China modernizing is a huge success story of the 21st century, notwithstanding the fact that it continues to have some political challenges, which I'll talk a little bit about later. Next, in social advancements, what I chose is gay rights. My husband and I would never have imagined 10 or 15 years ago, especially, that gay marriage would be something that would be possible in the United States. Here's a picture of us on a recent trip to Alaska, and the idea that that human beings that were left out of many parts of equal rights and liberties, that has been addressed. We're making great progress around the world with regards to women's rights. There are still challenges with regards to that. The Equal Rights Amendment in the United States has been stalled for a long time. There are countries in which the oppression of women and other minorities is still just dehumanizing and horrible. But I like to think that it's been getting better, maybe in fits and starts. But gay rights and women's rights and the rights of other minorities have been getting a lot of attention in the 21st century. And I think that's a great thing for humanity. The acceptance of the theory of evolution, which for me is a proxy measure for the acceptance of science, a scientific worldview informed by facts and realistic expectations about what's true and possible. I thought I had a graph in here, but it looks like I left it off. The acceptance of the theory of evolution among the general public, according to Pew Research, has exceeded 50% in the United States for the first time in history, since the poll's been conducted, I think, in the mid 20th century. So again, I treat that as a proxy for the progress of a more scientific mindset. And it's also more common to find that among younger people. Another thing that's been really interesting this century, we've had a couple of big financial crises. We've had the 2008 housing bubble. We had 2001, the tech bubble. And then most recently, we have had the pandemic associated economic upheavals. And the cat here beside me is saying hello. Very friendly cat. One of the things that's come out of this is a new way of looking at the role of government with regards to economic upheavals. There's a thing called modern monetary theory. I might give a separate Science Sunday about that this year. And that talks about essentially, I think it was Keynesian economics. Keynesian himself said something back in the 40s or 50s that anything a government or a nation can do in terms of materials and labor, it can afford to do. So matching the money supply to the available resources and labor of an economy is one of the things that a government can do. And at the same time, controlling inflation, et cetera, and providing for all of its citizens. So this is a new take on how government, corporations, and individuals can interact in a way that helps the prosperity of all. And pretty interesting theory. One of the outcomes, not necessarily or explicitly acknowledged by a lot of policymakers or decision makers at central banks, is this idea that government intervention in the economy can be critical to the health of the economy and ultimately to the health and well-being of the citizens that participate in that economy. So governments around the world in the 21st century have shown a lot more willingness to intervene and take drastic measures in times of crisis. Those opportunities were not taken, for example, during the Great Depression, and poverty and despair and human suffering spiraled out of control, I think ultimately contributing significantly to the chaos of World War II, as different economic systems and social systems were collapsing and being rebuilt. Fortunately, we had the New Deal in the United States that helped impoverished people that were in a sense victimized by laissez-faire capitalism, hands-off kinds of policies. But there are ways to continue keeping a lot of the good parts of capitalism in terms of its innovation incentives, as well as protecting people. And I think, my opinion is that in the 21st century, we'll see more progress in this regard in terms of the interaction between government, corporations, and citizens. All right, I'm going to pause again, see if there are any questions before I wrap up the part 4. All right, no other conversations, so I'm going to continue, and we'll be finished here in just a minute or 3 or so. Okay, religiosity decreasing. So I believe this is also a good proxy for the acceptance of a scientific worldview, one motivated by reason and reality rather than by tradition or even more dangerously, dogma, and dogma that is counterfactual. There's been a rapid growth of the religiously unaffiliated, what are often called the nuns, N-O-N-E, nuns, in the United States. Predominantly, it's younger people that identify as not being religiously affiliated. Religion can provide a lot of emotional and community benefits to people. It's not always and necessarily a terrible thing, but when it tries to make statements about what's real and true and possible in the world, it quickly runs into harsh realities of science. And people, in my opinion, are better served by paying attention to the scientific perspective to understand things like climate change and the benefits of genetic engineering and some of the enabling capabilities of economic theories and technology. All of these things are based in different sciences. And so having an aptitude for and an appreciation of the way science can inform and better our lives, to me, is about the most important thing that can happen. That's why, for example, I'm a science communicator. I believe it genuinely helps people. And then finally, this is not necessarily a positive. This is the rise of authoritarians. I don't know, Mike, have you joined us? Have you joined me yet?
Yes, I'm on.
Hey, Mike. Great.
Hi.
This is the last point. I don't know how long you've been watching, Mike. Did you have any thoughts that you wanted to add before I cover this last point? I'll just go back a minute here.
No, I thought that you kept them pretty clear there. I think that social advances is it social advances or social impulses? Most of these that you've gone through so far seem pretty positive. And to me as well, that's our impression. Other people would see some of these things, gay rights and decreasing religiosity, as a terrible, terrible impact on our culture nowadays too, right? So,
Right.
I mean, this is a bit of your opinion and how you're standing for scientific thought, maybe, but there can be a variety of different impulses or reactions to this too. And maybe this last one seems to be what I might perceive as a negative, but it does have an impact. I was going to say that it seems like authoritarianism seems to be a goal or a positive that many people think of that may be helping to solve problems. They're saying that democratic institutions can't solve problems because they're too complex, and you need just a strong man at the top making things happen, and then everything's better, and
Right.
And so I imagine you'll go into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I wanted to end this program talking about this particular issue that we've seen in the 21st century, the rise of authoritarians and authoritarian states and authoritarian ideologies. This is not a positive. I think everything else I've covered up till now has been a positive. Again, perhaps some people would argue with some of it, but there may also be people who argue that authoritarians are a positive, like you said, Mike. But again, my opinion is that it's very dangerous. These tend to be ideologues. They're not focused on human betterment and the betterment of the quality of life of everybody. And they tend not to be focused on the value of science and technology to inform us about what's real and possible in our world. And there are reasons for this. Last year, I gave a 2-part talk on merit, inequality, and discontent. You can find that on the YouTube history for the DuPage Church, and I think I've also copied it over to the Humanists, Prairie State Humanists YouTube channel as well. But a lot of these leaders are taking advantage of discontent and some of the myths and misstatements and false promises made by the traditional liberal agenda The one that I spent a lot of time covering with my two-part series was the myth of meritocracy. You know, work hard, play by the rules, and you'll make it. You'll be a success. Anybody can be a billionaire. Anybody can be a millionaire. You just have to work for it. And that turns out to be completely untrue. There's a great deal of luck and circumstance involved in success. The person who works 3 jobs and 60 hours a week, is it really true that they're a less valuable human being, less entitled to healthcare and education and financial and livelihoods stability than somebody who works 30 hours a week but gets paid a king's ransom for doing so? So I think that Mike, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay. I just got a message that I've been signed out on another device, so I hope another device. So I hope the YouTube channel is still up and running. In any case, the rise of authoritarians, you know, we saw in the 20th century the dangers of some of that with Nazism and communism and authoritarianism around the world, religious states, theocracies, and those kinds of impulses are still part of human nature. And I don't think that science or technology is going to take away those parts of human nature. We must, as a species, as a population, and as a human race, remain vigilant against some of the darker tendencies towards control and dogma and an ignorance of reality that motivates the appeal of some of these leaders and the impulses associated with them. And that's what I had for today. So, you know, sorry I ended on a bit of a downer, not as optimistic and cheery, but again, I think it is really important that we keep in mind the necessity for vigilance as we make progress with science and technology. There are certainly philosophies and governmental policies within the world that would have us discount the value of such a perspective, science, technology, and reality. So that's what I had. I'm going to go back and look at the comments on YouTube. Looks like it's been pretty quiet for a few minutes, but I wanted to thank everybody who watched this live today, and also those of you who will be tuning in later. Give us a thumbs up and subscribe, and we welcome your comments and feedback. You can always write a comment in the feed, even after the program if you watch it later, and we'll respond to it. And then Mike, you're going to be back in a couple weeks, and you want to tell us what you're going to be talking about?
Right. I've been looking into kind of a continuation of the talk of Beringia, and the plants and animals, basically the megafauna of that time, of the Pleistocene era. Interesting aspects of why animals got so big, why they reacted as they did to the climatic changes of the time, and what was impulsive to make them get large, and what caused them all to die out. Some of it's speculation, and some of it's some pretty well understood concepts, but pretty interesting just to look into their whole aspect, their whole life, and how the whole climate and the whole continent was affected by these large giant creatures.
Excellent. I'm really looking forward to it. We'll be together on stage at the DuPage Unitarian Church in 2 weeks. You know, it's a delightful conversation. I can never get enough science, and I hope those of you who are tuned in feel the same way. Thank you for your support, and thank you for watching. Take care, and we'll see you again soon.
So long.